Hey everyone, it's Michelle Brown. Welcome to our series on 8A certification. In this video, I'm going to talk to you about how to qualify for 8A certification. I'm Michelle Brown of Federal Certifications and Contracting Programs with FedBiz Exchange and FedBiz Now. In this video, I will tell you about how to qualify for 8A certification as the owner of a small disadvantaged business. So to qualify for a certification, you gotta have your stuff together. There's no ifs, ands, buts, or maybes. You gotta have it together. Otherwise, you'll go round and round in circles, you'll get denied, and then you'll be frustrated. So let's just talk about some of the basic things you need to know about getting your 8A certification. Most important, the owner that holds 51% or more of the small business must be socially or economically disadvantaged in order to qualify. If you have a 50-50 deal and one of you is socially or economically disadvantaged, that's the person that should hold the 51%. And you need to go through an official change in order to make sure that the person that is socially disadvantaged, i.e. equally economically disadvantaged, that person should be the one to have the paperwork change. There are a lot of husbands and wives and that maybe they have 50-50. If the wife is the person that is of a group that could be considered socially disadvantaged and you guys want to get your 8A, then of course the wife has to hold the 51% ownership, and it must be done legally, meaning you need to change your corporate paperwork. If you're a sole proprietor, it does not matter, but I never ever encourage people to be sole proprietors in a business. It is just not intelligent. You need to be a corporation, you need to be an LLC or a partnership. Regardless, the person who is socially disadvantaged, African American, Hispanic, a woman that has been through a lot, Asian Pacific, Native American, any of those groups, if your partner, spouse, person inside the business belongs to any one of those groups, then they should hold 51%. That is the only way you're going to get an 8A certification, and you need to change it legally on paperwork. Okay, it needs to show on your paperwork. Your story. So what's your story? The whole 51% socially, economically disadvantaged person in the business that you've identified that you want to get the 8A, that's your story. You need to make sure that everything is very clear and that the SBA understands why this person is 51% owner, even if you have two socially economically disadvantaged people that are in the business. You need to understand why you chose the wife over the husband, and because you could be asked questions as simple as that. You cannot say it's because I wanted to get an 8A. That's not acceptable. In fact, they could totally deny you just because of that. But it would be acceptable to say that my husband understands the business, he's also minority, and he's always wanted to do the management side of the business. I am the technical person, so he has 51% ownership. And again, all of that needs to be put in writing, but know your story, no matter what the situation is. You cannot have things all over the place or information or thoughts all over the place. The government, SBA, will check to ensure that the 51%er, without a doubt, is in control of the business. Relatives that have previously been involved in 8A certifications, not to say that you can't get it because your father had it or your mother had it, but it does say to be careful, and you need to make sure that your previous 8A situation or connection to a relative is not connected without permission. You can know or have an 8A previous 8A owner that wants to mentor you or something like that, but they cannot be involved in the business without the government knowing about it. They can only be like a mentor protege or something like that. And you should call and ask those questions or write to me and ask those questions if you have situations as such. You cannot have your brother just graduated out of an 8A program in his business, and then he comes over to you and say, hey sis, I want you to start a company so that I can be part of your company and we can get another 8A, because I already made 20 million over here. I want to help you make another 20 million. You just need to understand what the situation is clearly and if it's acceptable, because you can be turned down right up front for situations that look a little bit shady. Other businesses with outside parties will be a problem. You cannot allow people to invest in your business, share office space, they give you money. All of those things are unacceptable when it comes to the 8A program. The 8A program is about socially, economically disadvantaged people that truly deserve a helping hand when it comes to 8A, even though nothing is placed in your lap, because when you get into 8A, you will find out nobody's giving you anything. But the government wants to make sure that when the set-asides come, that they are truly going to individuals that are socially and economically disadvantaged. Not that somebody is behind the scenes pulling your strings. And just so you know, people go to jail for that for a very long time. And we do have people that have gone to jail for things like that. You guys know about that. You hear these stories all the time. So don't be one of those people. Only do this for you, your family, your business, and just make sure that there is no questionable history or interaction with other folks that are trying to pull your strings, because you may be that person that gets into trouble because you didn't realize that you can't have all kinds of folks involved in your business. Now, can someone buy into 10% of ownership in the company? Absolutely. 15%? Absolutely. But the controlling shares must be owned by the 51%er. Just don't forget that. You just need to also remember that if you have someone in your business that owns other businesses, there can be no connection. You can't start a business to help someone else's business. Those things are out of the question. Okay? But if you have questions, you should write to me or call the SBA and ask the question. So the applicant must also be in business for a minimum of 2 years. At minimum, 2 years, 2 full years. If you have not been in business for 2 years, then you'll need to write a letter explaining why you should be in the program, and you need to show and demonstrate that you did very well in business over the 2 years. And when I say very well, I don't mean you have to be worth millions in your business. It just means you need to show some customers, you need to show some contacts, you need to show some actual contracts. Some of you have state contracts, you have a nice size commercial business. All of those things are great, and they will allow you to get in the program whether you're 2 years old or not. You also need to show that you've been doing a lot of your business under one NAICS code, even though commercial industry type businesses don't use NAICS codes necessarily, but you could classify what you do under your NAICS code. The government will not know the difference. So if you're doing some printing and you're using NAICS code 24567, you can still show that that's under 24567. But if it is a federal contract that you've gotten, and now you want to go into the 8A business, or you want to get an 8A certification, I should say, you need to make sure that most of your business is under one primary NAICS code. It doesn't matter once you get in, which is really, really crazy, but to get in, they make it a criteria. So just make sure that you are aware of that. And I talk to you a little bit more about the NAICS code in just a few minutes. But you must be in business for 2 years. You will need to write that letter if you haven't been in business for 2 years. That is a requirement. That would go with your application package. You'll need to show viability with customers and contracts. Like I said, I mean, I've done 8As years ago where, it was a construction guy and he had contracts, but they were all commercial, and which was fine, which was great. The government does not want you depending solely on federal contracts to run or grow your business. So keep that in mind. They will not look at that as a good thing if you're solely dependent on federal contracts. But this particular gentleman, he didn't have huge contracts. I would say he didn't even have $200,000 worth of business. He had construction contracts that he had done with businesses that he knew. It was about 6 or 7, and he made about a couple $100,000, but they were worth 30,000, 20,000, 50,000, even some 5,000. So you just need to show that you're doing business and that you're being consistent. If you cannot show this, you'll need to wait until you can, because if you're all over the place, business is sporadic, you don't have your records together, you can't show a history of the income, even if it's only $50,000, even if it's only 20 or 30. If you cannot show that, then you need to build up your business a little bit more, because they do look at that as a requirement for success. You have to be able to stand on your own. And to be honest with you, you'll hear me say throughout, don't depend on these people to help you be successful in the 8A program. You will need to be in a position to do it yourself, even if it means you have to struggle through it, because the help is there, but they don't know how to build businesses like you do or like I do. They don't understand some of those things. You never want to depend on the government people that get paychecks to tell you things that you don't necessarily know yourself. You need to get your training, like you're listening to me. There are programs out there to help you. Not a lot when it comes to 8A, that's why I'm doing this, but getting federal contracts is getting federal contracts. So listen to some of my other training if you need to do that. Come to some of our training courses that we have online, but remember, nothing against the government people. I think these programs are amazing. Some of the people are very supportive, but they don't know business. They don't do business. They've never had a business. They all get a paycheck. You create your own paycheck. That's the difference. So keep that in mind. But once you get in there, you need to hit the ground running. And in order to do that, you have to have some business experience. Otherwise, you will use up your 8A opportunity and you will fail. So if you don't have a good customer base, again, it doesn't have to be worth a lot of money, but you have to know how to do business, because nobody's going to be able to help you with that part of it. Okay? Your NAICS codes. They'll always ask you about what's your primary code. Okay? It matters. It matters just to get into the program. I know 8As that are all over the board. I don't agree with that, but they're doing all types of federal contracts, which is good, but I don't agree that when you go into your profile for SAM or for federal contracting, I don't agree that it looks great to have all kinds of NAICS codes all over the place. But regardless, when you're trying to get into the 8A certification program, you won't be allowed to have that anyway. You will have to choose one primary code, which is where most of your business will fall. So choose your primary code for your business. SBA will track your primary code, trying to connect all of your work. So if you have 5 contracts, they'll expect at least 3 or 4 to be under that code. Make sure that your primary source code, your primary NAICS code is on your taxes. If you have someone else that does your taxes, your CPA or your bookkeeper, whoever it is, What they do is, to no fault of their own, they just choose an NAICS code that looks like what you do. They don't know any better because nobody ever tells them. The SBA doesn't tell you that before you apply for the program. Again, it's one of those secrets. What they will say is your primary source code is the code that you will operate under. It's the code that you will go into the program under, but they don't tell you that you are going to have a problem if your IRS shows one code and you show another. So if you have to choose a code, go to your taxes to look and see what primary code your CPA or your bookkeeper used, or the code that you use. That's the code that you should use for your 8A certification. And if that changes, then you need to make sure that it's changed on your taxes. It's easier to choose the code that you use for your taxes as a primary NAICS code than it is to go back and ask the IRS to look at how you get your work differently. It would just be a mess. So nobody ever tells you that. I've seen it interfere not just with 8A certifications, but WOSB certifications. It's just something that you need to be cognizant of, and you need to make sure that the code you choose, you're consistently using it, even though you may get contracts that say something different. If you have influence over the primary code that is being used under a contract, ask them to use the primary NAICS code that you would like to use. Okay? Make a big deal out of it, but it's a big deal. Application preparation time. Well, you're going to spend a lot of time doing your application. This is why people pay $3,000 and $4,000 to get this done, because it's a lot of work and it's a lot of time. But it's worth it. It can take you 2 weeks, or it could take you 2 months, or it could take you 12 months to prepare your application. It depends on how much guidance you get, and it depends on if you listen to what I'm about to tell you. First of all, you need to be organized. It's the difference between weeks or months. We can submit an 8A application in 2 weeks if our client has everything that they need. So we have a policy where we don't like to take money or sign contracts with the business until we know that they have everything that they need. And most of the time when people come to you to pay you to do an 8A certification, they have all of their stuff together. And if they don't have 90% of it together, then they can get their hands on it pretty quickly. That's how you need to think. If you're not going to pay someone to do it, but you want to have this done, don't start until you get everything organized. So the more organized you are, the less time it will take. Identify a person responsible for completing the application. That would be the person managing the entire process. If that's you as the CEO or president, then you need to set aside time to do it. If it's someone else, then you need to give them time to do it. Maybe you allow them to, if you can afford to have them step away from the day-to-day or whatever their regular job is, have them step away and allow them 2 weeks to get everything together, pull all the documentation together, and they will have that 8A application done within a couple of weeks. They'll have it, the package completed and submitted, and that's what you want. Ensure that your profile is set up in SAM. If you're listening to this because you're interested in federal contracts, I'm assuming you're already set up in SAM. Make sure everything is updated in SAM, because you won't be able to do your 8A application unless SAM is up to date. If it's time to renew, go ahead and renew. And right now they have this whole notary thing going on, meaning if you give someone permission to update your SAM, or you're the CEO or president, you have to provide a notarized letter from the CEO or president saying that you are the authorized person. And the reason the government is doing this now is because we have losers out there that are trying to steal our information. They're stealing from businesses all over the place. So now the process has just become harder. You used to be able to go in your SAM and just update everything. It would take 24 hours. Now you have to submit a letter, which is completely ridiculous if you own the company. But that's because we have so many scam artists in our system that they've been stealing money from businesses, not just small businesses, all businesses. It's really very sad. But now we're the ones who suffer. So we have to get a notarized letter to say that we're authorized to actually change our own SAM accounts, which is, it's very disturbing, but this is the way it is. So pull your entire list of items together, which I'm going to review with you in just a few minutes. You'll pull all of your items together, the list that the federal government gives you for the SBA program, and if you do that, that is a major thing to do. If you do that, that is more than, I would even go to say more than 50% of the job, maybe even more, maybe even 60%, because everything else is about the paperwork that you have in front of you. So pull all of your items together, make sure that you have everything before you get started. When you don't have everything before you get started, that's when the problem starts. You're all over the place and you don't get it done for months and months. So don't go into the system. You can go ahead and make sure your SAM profile is updated. Do that. But everything else, when it comes to doing your 8A, you need to wait until you have all of your documents together. If you don't have financials together, then don't start until you get those financials together. Sometimes you have some businesses that do their own financials. If you do your own financials, do that first. You have a separate list for things that must be done if you're going to be worried about your financials. Some of us have different situations where we could just request those from our CPA, or we're using a bookkeeping system and we're all caught up. If you don't have your taxes done, you could use your extension, which is no problem at all, but they will want to see your taxes for the past few years. So things like that. If you don't have the list that I'm about to go over with you, get the list together, then come back and do this. If some things on the list are non-existent, you need to create them or make sure that they're there before you sit down to do this. You will be less frustrated, much happier, and you'll get approved much easier and much faster. So let's start with the list of items. Number 1, you'll need 3 years of personal tax returns and 3 years of business tax returns. The last 3 years. If you did not file a year, that's not a problem. They'll just ask you for the extension. You'll need a signed personal financial statement. This is to prove that you are not worth more than the designated amount. Remember what I said. This is about your personal wealth. And as a matter of fact, I believe I've said this in other trainings, but all certifications are about your personal wealth, meaning they want to make sure that they're not setting aside for a person who happens to be very wealthy. Just because you're a part of a socially disadvantaged group does not mean that you're disadvantaged. You have to prove that you're disadvantaged. And by that, we mean with 8A, it has to be a net worth of not more than $250,000. With WOSB, as a woman-owned small business, it has to be less than that, not more than $750,000. It may have even gone up for WOSBs. Economically disadvantaged, you do have to have a certain net worth, but if you're just a regular WOSB without the ED, without the economically disadvantaged, you can have millions. Your net worth can be millions. And the reason it's that way is because women in general are still socially disadvantaged. We don't always have to be economically disadvantaged, but women are socially disadvantaged. That's why we have a WOSB set-aside program, just like we have the 8A set-aside program and the Veterans set-aside program. So that 413, that's a form that you will need to complete. It comes from the federal government. It's called a financial statement. And on that financial statement, they will be able to tell what your assets are and what your liabilities are. Number 3, you're going to need a list of your assets and liabilities, your loans and your lines of credit, because all of that goes on that 413. Pull that together before you get busy, because if you're doing this for your boss, a president or CEO, or this is your role, then you'll need all of this information before you get started. So sit down and do the 413, or have the owner do the 413 before you get started. If you are the owner, do your personal financial statement by collecting all of your information first, because you'll need to put it into the system and you'll need to put it onto this form. 4, proof of ownership, how the business was started. I know that sounds ridiculous, but again, they just want to make sure you really did start the business. If you didn't start it, it's okay. Did your father pass it down to you? Is your father still involved in the business? They want to know the answers to all of that. They still want to know that you are in control and the business is owned by you. Number 5, property listings, mortgages, and the value and tax assessors information. They want all of that. So if you own 10 properties, write them all down. Now, owning 10 properties doesn't necessarily mean you are disqualified. You could owe money on each one of those properties, which would be part of your liabilities, which would be helpful. But if owning those properties makes you and your net worth much more, you are not likely to qualify for 8A. You should just stick with the other set-aside programs. Okay, I'm just letting you know. But if you have massive mortgages, if you own 5 houses and there's no equity in either 5 of them, you're going to be fine. But they'll need you to prove that. They're going to want to see deeds and mortgages and who your lender is and things like that. I know it's going to sound like a lot, but it's not that bad once you pull everything together, especially if you want to take your business to a multi-million-dollar business through a federal program. It really is not that bad. Number 6, profit and loss statements. Remember I said if you don't have your financials ready, do your financials first before you start this process. They are going to ask for financial statements for the previous year, and then they will want financial statements for the interim period, which would be the last 90 days. Okay, and actually your 90 days for financial statements you should do last, because if you print those out and you do those and then it takes you months to get your application completed, which I'm trying to teach you how not to do that. But if it does take you that long, then they're going to ask for another financial statement, another interim financial statement. But if you're a business that you don't have your financials together, please don't start this process until you get your financials together. We wouldn't even take a client's money if they don't have their financials together. Doesn't mean you don't have any, just means that maybe you're a little behind or you need to get them taken care of. Corporate LLC paperwork, they want to see all of your paperwork filed. If you're a sole proprietor, of course, I already told you that is not good. You should never be a sole proprietor in a business. If you are, you need to incorporate. You can do that in your state. You do not have to buy or hire a lawyer, but you could get some information from a legal organization like LegalZoom or something like that. But you need to make sure that you are set up as a corporation, an LLC, a partnership, or something like that. That's where you might want to get some legal advice, but you should never be a sole proprietor, especially trying to do federal contracts. And there are people that are 8As and they're sole proprietorships. The reason that I say that, for those of you that don't know, is because that opens you up to all kinds of lawsuits. You could lose everything. So if you earn 15 million and you're a sole proprietor and somebody wants to sue you, whether it be an employee, whether it be the federal government, it could be anyone. Something could happen, you don't want to open yourself up to that type of liability. You are protected when you have a legal status. So talk to a lawyer about that, even if you just do a $25 or a free consultation. You also need to have meeting minutes ready or available if you don't have any. Your most recent meeting minutes, not all of them, but if you're a corporation, you're likely to have that. LLC, you're likely to have that. You also need to have operating agreements and bylaws. And remember, all of these are interactive or interchangeable depending on what your structure is. For instance, if you're an LLC, you would have an operating agreement. You might not have, bylaws, but you just understand whatever comes with having an LLC, and they tell you what those documents are. You won't have to guess. So they help you in that manner. If you're a corporation, they're going to ask for specific documents. So just keep that in mind. Your customer contracts or sales reports. Remember what I said. I already told you about that. I already told you that you're going to need to demonstrate that your company is viable, that you actually make sales. Number 9, bank signature authority. Like, who are your account signers? They want to make sure that people are not taking money out of your bank account, that you don't have people all over the place signing checks and doing what they want with your bank account. Also, it demonstrates who really is the power, who really is the authority over the bank accounts. So just make sure that you understand that's what they're looking for. So they'll ask you either for a letter or signature cards. A lot of people don't like to give their signature cards, but ask if you can use something in place of that, like a bank letter. Certificate of good standing, every state has them. Most of the time you can download them online. So you need to have that. It needs to be current. Proof of citizenship, number 11. Proof of citizenship, they may ask you for that most of the time, especially if you are born in another country or if you are of a certain descent. So, they may ask you for proof of citizenship. That could be your passport, that could be your license. It has to be a government ID. Resumes, they want resumes for you and everyone that is an officer or a director on your team. So you may as well have that ready. An organizational chart, you can create something if you don't have an organizational chart, but they want to know who is on your management team, your senior managers, VPs, president, CEO, which would be, of course, you or your boss. And then they also want officers, directors, all of that. So those folks need to be on the organizational chart, and then on the organizational chart, and then all the folks underneath them and their departments. What departments do they run? And number 13, transferred assets within the past 2 years. If you haven't done that, that's fine. If you have done that, you need to tell the truth about it, because if you don't, it will look suspicious. If you have, you need to have a good explanation as to why you transferred assets. What they're looking for is to make sure that you're not trying to hide assets. If you transfer $20,000 to your daughter, you need to tell why. You gave it to her for school to pay for her education. Those are perfectly fine. But if you just gave $30,000, $20,000, $50,000 to your sister to hold just because you don't want anybody to know you have that money, that's not going to fly, and you could be turned down, because that $30,000 could make the difference between you being under the net worth threshold and you being over the net worth threshold. So these are the major items. This list is not all inclusive. They could ask you for other items, but these are the primary items that will be requested when you're doing your 8A. And if you can pull these together, you can probably get everything done. Now, I do want to mention before I go on to application processing time, if you have 3 or 4 businesses, you will need to clean that situation up before you will have to declare that you have all of those businesses, but you need to make sure that you have your story straight about why you have all of those businesses and what they're doing. For instance, if you have a real estate company but it's not active, you need to say that. You may need to shut it down. If you have another type of business, you own a grocery store with your brother and you are not involved in it, you need to get out of that business. Those kinds of things can make your net worth go up, and they also look suspicious. Application processing time. So accept that the process can take 6 months to a year. It could be a little bit less, but in between 6 months to a year, because you have a lot of folks applying, so you have to go through the process. Having it all together before you submit will expedite the process. They have 90 days. I don't have that on here, but they have 90 days before they can even reach out to you. So they have 90 days to take a look at your application and get it all together. Once your application is submitted, you simply need to track the progress. Expect that they're going to ask you questions. Even if your package is perfect, which by the way, there's no such thing. I've been doing this and working at a company that does this for 13 years, almost 14, and there's no such thing as perfect. They are always going to try to find something. But even if they don't ask you for more documents, they're going to ask you more questions. The first time that you get a response, they're going to ask you anywhere from 10, possibly to 20 questions. And sometimes if it's 20 or more, they'll send back your application and ask you to resubmit because you're missing a lot of things. And it's not necessarily because of what you've done, it's because of how they look at it. Sometimes you may realize that you did submit something, but they're saying you didn't. Don't argue with them, just resubmit it. And with that said, I thought we had a lot more to go, but looks like that was the end. So with that said, thank you for joining me. And I know I just gave you a lot of information, but if you really want to do your 8A application, you want to submit it, you want to get it approved, and you really want to do this, go ahead and let us know, because we do have a 2-day program that helps individuals like yourselves get their 8As completed, submitted, and approved. And with that said, don't forget to leave me your questions and write to me if you want to. I have people write to me all the time, but hopefully this will help you to understand what you're going to be up against if you decide to get your 8A certification.